sharp cheddar cheese that they had on the counter, and they took a knife, it was warm, and cut right through it and gave it to whoever. So the kids would get a sample or a slice. And you know, when I was in the 70s, when I was a kid going there, Gerard Gurdon would get me a slice of bologna. Mike would get the slice of cheese for the kids. My mother would give them pretzels. But she says, I believe they called it store cheese, and it was sharp. And your grandfather would cut us a slice. Your Uncle Tom was a quiet man, and Francis was more outgoing. He was like the face of the market. She says, and both, very handsome, by the way. And she says you could buy real Coke syrup there. She said she loves the market, and what she liked is that as a kid, she or the other kids could walk around with a nickel and not feel like they were intruding on everything. They just allowed them to be kids. She wanted to spend her nickel, and she did. But she said my grandfather always gave her something to eat, which was nice. So
people bought the Coke syrup because it was used as a cough syrup.
There we go. Yeah. Well, since I brought that up about my grandfather, some of the things that I would hear is someone would come in, a couple of ladies with a big pocketbooks and bags, and they would sneak some stuff in there. And one day my grandfather confronted them, and they couldn't afford it. And what ended up happening was they did their shopping and got what they could afford, and he snuffed the other stuff into their bags. But he also did that with birthdays. He would go to, up on West Street in Pittsfield, there were a lot of wholesalers, White Star and other ones up there. And he would go, and I would buy a case of candy, chocolate, something like that, and have it in the back, and he knew when a lot of people's birthdays were. So when it was their birthday, you go back and get a piece of butcher paper, wrap it up, and put it in their bag, but nothing on there. So when they get home, they open it up, and they have a birthday gift. He would buy cigarettes in Florida. Now this is back when they thought smoking was good for you. He would buy cigarettes in Florida cheaply, and when they delivered out in the center, he would give them to those that had a tougher time with money. I got something, ironically, the other day. The guy from New Jersey sent me this. Bob hooked me up with this guy. This is an article that was in the Berkshire Eagle in 1939, and it was my great-grandfather, John Bob. And he worked, it says he retired from the New Haven Railroad after 50 years. And I wish I saw this when I was younger and growing up. It's pretty neat. But you know, they talk about a bunch of different things there. But it reminded me, he was, my recollection, or not that I knew him, but people would tell me that he would be out in front sweeping with a broom all the time. And so, you know, that's fun. And then he would have a wheelbarrow with his coat on the wheelbarrow and walk home. And eventually the people in the railroad would say, what do you got in that wheelbarrow? And, you know, so he didn't get paid down there, so he pulled it over and he had 2 six-packs of beer. So, he didn't work cheap. The upstairs of the market at that time was an apartment earlier, and then what they did, because they were so busy, they turned it into a big storage area. It was empty, but they had shelves on the walls, and they would get, like, you know, the 40s and 50s, 200 cases per Monday on an order. And the rule of thumb is they like to have 3 weeks worth of product upstairs, just in case they didn't. It's like Tim was talking about, if it's a big storm, you gotta stock up. And, but just in case they had enough product upstairs. And what the people did is they walked upstairs to fill an order. They'd make a list of what they need, bring the stuff down, and all day long they would continue to stock the shelves from upstairs to downstairs. And that reminds me, just as a midpoint here, when we were doing over the building, you know, like I said, how fortunate we are to have, knock on wood, all this happen the way it did. We went through and we gutted the whole place. So the fire damaged everything except for the structure. And, you know, and so we cleaned out everything, and I vacuumed out every corner and every little cobweb and put new stuff in, new wiring. And upstairs, there was a hole, and we started, bottles and cans started falling out, and wrappers. And So when they would go upstairs, they would, they wouldn't only get the stuff. So I found these things. These were actually wrappers that I found in the walls. Jelly rolls. This is Millbrook bread. Snowballs, 10 cents. Drake's cakes, sunshine biscuits. This is the bread section. Who remembers Croft Cream Ale? Anybody? Anybody? I looked it up online, and that was a beer, Croft Cream Ale. That was a beer that was made in Jamaica Plain, I think, where this Hennessy, it's not Hennessy, Heffenreffer was made. There's a bunch of German beers, and the guy was talking about when he was growing up, the town just smelled like beer. And anyways, it's kind of a higher potent beer. Cot sodas, we remember that, Schaefer. This one I didn't remember, Clico Club, remember that? Libby's and Diet Delight, I don't know. And so I'm pulling out all these bottles and bottle caps and,
Will they fill?
no, all consumed. They were all consumed. This was Sand Springs, which is in Williamstown, Mass. Ginger ale, Valentine ale, Schaefer, Orange Crush, Rheingold, Coca-Cola, Uptown was another one, and then Dobler beer. Remember Dobler?
Albany, New York.
Yeah?
You get down to the racetrack, up in the Valley racetrack, $3 for a buck.
My father's memory of Dobler beer was every time Bosco Zancanado would start up the tractor, all the kids in the neighborhood would run to the tractor because the first one there got to drive. And then they would do the haying or whatever. But after a hard day's work, he would give them half a glass of Dobler beer. And the rest is history. That was up until the 50s. So there was a guy named Roland Mintz that came on board. And my grandparents loved Roland. He was a hard worker, and he was another butcher. So we got a history of butchers. And George Gurdon has a son named Jake, or Gerard, who we'll talk about, who was another butcher. But Roland ended up taking over the store, actually. And Roland owned this store for a couple of years. And he also, at that time, owned the Sheffield Market. You guys know the Sheffield Market down behind the green in there? And it's almost the exact same layout as this market. And so he and his wife, Gloria, and Gloria was introduced to Roland by my aunt, Peggy Ann, because they were in the same class. And then the rest is history. They've been together ever since, and Roland is probably in his 80s, and last I heard he was still cutting meat in Hillsdale. But they ran a great business down there. Gloria in the front and Roland in the back, mom and pop all the way. And then Jake took over this store up here. Now the question comes up of my father and my uncle, why didn't you take over the store? And why? I got an email from my father. Dad, what are your memories? And he's not that elaborate with his typing right now because he's a little under the weather. But this is what he wrote. Monday, and he didn't, he wrote it happily and he wanted to share more with me, but Monday, home from school to unload the trailer with inventory. And according to my uncle, it was never less than 200 cases. Tuesday, unload the sides of beef for Roland to cut up. Wednesday through Friday, or any day, they would clean the produce racks, fill and dust and stock the shelves. And all the days they would do bagging and boxing of groceries. And they would go take the phone orders, fill them, and then deliver them. And my uncle said he really liked to work till midnight because then he could have the car after that. And Saturday was a madhouse. It was crazy busy in there. And then Sunday after church, they had to clean spotless the produce racks. So, it was a lot of work, and that was their impression. And at that time, my father had 2 kids, And he was making good money. He was making $1.86 an hour at the mill. So, I mean, why would he? But, you know, he might have been making $2 an hour, I don't know. But, you know, it was more stable than, you know, the question of the market. But something interesting, I went over to Baldwin's Hardware several years ago when Mr. Baldwin was alive. And he said to me, he goes, you know, your grandfather and I were going to go into business together. And I thought, wow, does anyone know where I'm leading on this one? What Mr. Baldwin wanted to do, and they wanted to have the hardware store and the market in a different location. He showed me this big scale 3D layout of their proposal. So it had fake trees and fake cars and the buildings, and it was before the post office was there. They were going to have a strip mall before there were strip malls. We're talking 1960. So it would have been a big hardware store and a big market, and then whatever else is around that. And can you imagine how that would have changed the town and the traffic in the town? Pretty neat. It didn't happen at that time. My grandfather was born in 1900, so he was 60, 61, something like that. And it wasn't, you know, I wasn't as excited about jumping into new projects. And also, I think that they had an established good business going here, so why would they change? But soon after, Roland took over the store, and Roland had his period there, and then Jake, who was Gerard Gurdon, George Gurdon's son, another butcher, took over the store. And Gerard had the store from about 1965 to 1978. And, you know, since we're talking about possibly moving the store, I bet you, I don't know if anyone will know this, Jake, and I remember this because when I was a kid, I lived up on Stockbridge Road, last house on the left, and Jake was talking about moving the market up to where the turnpike is, that big open area there.
Yeah.
And we loved it because we could ride our bikes around in a new parking lot and see people, but it never happened. So that was toward the end of when Jake, and so right after that, he ended up selling it. But as far as business goes, in the 50s, they're doing really well. But there's other, you know, like First National in Great Barrington, A&P in Great Barrington, into the 60s, starting to come in. And so this is a market. And, you know, over the years, people got everything there. But now there's better prices out there, there's more choices, more selections, and I don't think the business ever went down in the 50s, but into the 60s it did. It really changed what it is. It was a great place for meat, but you just weren't buying canned products there and things like that. So business changed, and it really changed more in the 70s. In the 70s, it was, you know, Price Chopper was around, and that was more defined. So, and the town really wasn't doing that well. Down here, the building next to Aggie's then was dilapidated and condemned. A lot of places weren't rented. And business was tougher. And Jake ended up getting out of the business, and he sold it to a couple from California named, for 5 points, what are their names? Remember? Cy and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Cy and Tony. Tony was his wife, Cy's wife. And they were in California, and they had, you know, were very successful in computers, I think. And they wanted to get out of the rat race. So they got into a mom and pop store. But they lasted a year. It just wasn't for them. You know, they may have started out excited, but their hours were actually 9 o'clock to 5 or 6. Sometimes, according to my mother, they would show up at 9:30 or later. And so, you know, at the end of their first year, they were ready to go. And this new couple came into the store, my mother and Mike. Now, see what happened is that this was my grandfather's store on my father's side, and then he sold it. So it's out of my hands, you know. When I was in 3rd grade, some kid named Mark Hinman said, yeah, I got it at Fallon's. I'm like, why is he calling it Fallon's? That's my last name. You know, I didn't know. I was 7 years old. And so And it went through Roland, Jake, the couple from California, and now my stepfather and my mom have the store.
What year is this?
1979. And both Mike and my mother worked on the turnpike, and it just wasn't enough to pay the bills. And Mike, I remember this too, Mike. I don't know if you remember this. There was an article in I think it was the Berkshire Sampler, which is the Sunday paper, on continuing education. They had a picture of Mike at the DCC library, and it said in the caption, "I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in a toll booth." And he didn't. He didn't. He got into the market, and they said, "What did we do?" They got in there, and so 1979, 1980, the same principles apply. Price Chopper's doing great, and you're not going to run a business on milk, bread, and meat. You know, you'll do okay if you run it like Roland, mom and pop, and that's it. But something had to happen. They said they would stand inside and watch the cars go by. Some days that they did $100 at the cash register. And they were playing cards on the counter, she said. And she also actually took a job at BMC in the ER for a couple of years to make a little extra money. But something happened. Everyone remembers Uncle Pete. You know, you drive through the town and everyone's got Braves stuff on. Uncle Pete Scorpitt worked for the Atlanta Braves. And he sent Mom and Mike a coffee maker. Then, no one was drinking coffee like we do now. If you drove in your car with a coffee, you didn't have a lid that was shaking around. You didn't buy it like that. They got coffee. And now Aggie still had the store down here, so, you know, Aggie didn't get coffee. And then Julie and Dave bought that one, and they didn't get coffee for 3 or 4 years. So they were the only one with coffee, and traffic started to build. Mike started having sandwiches, these 99-cent sandwiches in the back, and it was roast beef. And people were coming in, wow, and people were talking to their friends. And then he would have like 99-cent tuna, chicken salad, egg salad, ham salad, something different every day. And he had a tray, and he would put them up on top of the cooler. And when they were sold out, they were gone. But 30, 35 of them, and people would come in sometimes like 3 days in a row for the 99-center. And then they would go to a roast beef or something else. So it was a nice way to get people in the store, and it really worked. And what I was thinking also is, Mike, in that store, it was a grocery store and a butcher shop. So there was no kitchen, no nothing. When people would say, my kitchen, I didn't have a kitchen. All we had was a rotisserie. And that's all Mike had. He started making soup. And everything he cooked in the rotisserie. You know, you're supposed to. He had a turkey pan, which you cook turkeys in, put beef noodle soup or whatever in there, put it in there and heat it, and put it in the warmer and serve it with a ladle. It worked. He had traffic. He also made his own sausage, which everyone loved, and he started making sausage subs, cooked it in the rotisserie. He made barbecue ribs on Thursday. He had a schedule. Sausage was Monday. Wednesday was always meatballs, Thursday was always barbecue ribs, Friday was tuna, clam chowder, and he got this schedule going and people could rely on it. And it was rock and roll traffic, they really did well. And Mom in front, this is the community center part. Now she was wonderful, everyone remembers my mother when she was there. She was, Jennifer Reynolds